Welcome to the second of a series of podcasts around American Polish connectivity, structured around Bogdan Kotnis' historical novel, Kaz, War, Love, and Betrayal. Thank you, viewers, for your comments and questions. Keep them up. Welcome, Bogdan. Thanks for returning for another interview.
Hi, Bob. Glad to be back and welcome to everyone.
So I'm Robert Terzian, your moderator for this series of conversations with Dr. Kotnis. I have to admit that I didn't expect such a great reception from our first interview. The main criticism and the question was, why should Americans want to tune in? What's the purpose of these interviews? What outcome do you want? So, Bogdan, what the heck are we doing here and why?
You know what, Bob? Just wake up. Fellow Americans, wake up. I want to wake America up to the real and urgent threat that Russia poses today. Not maybe, not tomorrow, but today. They're engaged in an insidious and devastating warfare that frankly challenges our status quo and safety. We are in World War III, and Americans are more worried sometimes about whether the line at Starbucks is too long. And this dire threat, this warfare, is obvious to Poles, but seemingly oblivious to most Americans. I feel that American policymakers are either ignorant of it or unwilling to state publicly what they know from intelligence reports.
So what you're saying, it's kind of a wow. This is a new kind of warfare, apparently, and it's World War III. That's hard to understand, but I can hear the comments. We'll have to come back to that. I want to go to the questions we got. Another listener was incredulous about your statement that Russia started the Second World War. What do you say to that?
Again, it's well documented that under Stalin's orders, Russians trained and armed Germans on Russian soil to prepare them for World War II. Because under the terms of surrender then, Germans were not allowed to build a military. So what did they do? They went to their old allies, old buddies, Russia, and actually served Russia's interest. And in Hitler, Stalin found a fanatical leader who would start a war that served Russia's purpose. That is the reason that Stalin negotiated an agreement with Germany before the kinetic phase of World War II, called the Molotov-Ribbentrop non-aggression agreement, with a secret codicil that remained sealed until the Nuremberg trials. It divided Europe up between Russia and Germany before the war started.
That's pretty interesting. But are you the only person? Is there anybody else that agrees with you about this?
Well, it's a good story. I didn't make it up myself. There is a lot of sources if you want to look for them. But I would recommend for someone who wants to get a good start was to check Viktor Suvorow's groundbreaking book, The Icebreaker, with the subtitle, Who Started the Second World War, among other sources. And for those who don't have time to go in depth, just check out the Wikipedia page on Molotov-Ribbentrop or Ribbentrop-Molotov non-aggression agreement and see the maps, comparing Europe under the non-aggression pact before as compared to the map immediately after the Russians' invasion. Note that even before Russia invaded, Russia allowed the use of a broadcast station in Minsk to assist the Luftwaffe in their bombing raids on Poland.
Well, just recently, Putin gave an interview in which he accused Poland of starting World War II. But before we get into that, I'm more interested at the moment in the fact that he gives very few interviews to anybody, and he did, in fact, give an interview to one individual. And I'm curious about uh, how this person was selected. I mean, what do you know anything about that?
I don't know any details. Of course, I know about the interview, and I believe that Putin knew this man had a large following and would promote ideas devised by Russian propagandists to destabilize faith in the U.S. institutions and values, which has been a long-term strategy of Russian intelligence, just to destabilize and sow chaos within the United States.
Hmm. Well, in that interview that where he accused Poland of starting the war, it was surprising to me that only Poland, no other country attempted to rebut that charge. And the Ministry of Foreign Affairs for the Republic of Poland did, but it's a ridiculous view of history as far as I can tell. But the fact that nobody else responded kind of reminds me of the position that Poland had in 1939, where no one came to its rescue when it was invaded by both Germany and Russia. But perhaps even more devastating than that idea is that there also were very few news organizations that I could find that picked up the story of Poland's rebuttal. When I did a Google search, I found only two sources, Newsweek and Yahoo News. What can you say about that? What's going on here?
Frankly, it's not surprising to me. And as I mentioned before in our first interview, Poland is not treated seriously. It's worth mentioning that in Putin's interview for the American audience, moderated by an American journalist, Poland was mentioned more often than the United States or Germany. Quite a surprising high number of mentions for a country that does not matter. But it tells directly what was on Putin's mind during the interview and probably before and after. So, from my point of view, that's what I've been trying to advocate, and that's why I open my mouth. Ignoring the Polish point of view impedes and diminishes the quality of our assessment of a very dire situation we're in. On top of that, the Polish government has not yet decided to invest in the obvious, the building of its political lobby in the United States. They have a bunch of things to do for a country that is barely 30 years old, after the colonial era of Russia domination. So I want to really wake up America to the Russian threat and to the need of treating Poland as a subject and not the object of geopolitics today. I'm afraid that my voice is not enough to influence anyone in the American establishment. And quite frankly, I need your help, viewers. Let them know that the time for squabbling for some internal positioning, it's not a good time to do it now because their threat is real.
Well, let's turn to the interview for a second. What do you make of that interview?
As we said before, I think that it's the interview is harmful to American and Western interests at a time when we have been under Russian attack for 10 years. Ever since they fired the first shot in Ukraine and broke the balance of power in Europe established after World War II in 1945, 80 years ago. And I understand that people want to make money and build recognition, but if they have American interests and freedom in mind, they should know better. And remember Jane Fonda during the Vietnam War? She meant well, but she was just a tool in a hybrid warfare directed against us.
Yeah, you make a good point. I mean, we do live in a society where freedom of speech is highly valued. Um, and I can see that, when you're an individual talking, it's one thing, but when you have a megaphone or the press, it arguably is something a little bit different. I guess that what bothers me, though, is that if somebody was concerned or had a concern, and I guess the fact is they didn't, and that's part of the problem, uh, they might have uh, engaged in this broadcast, but they would have couched it in some kind of a context. It had to have been a propaganda ploy by Putin, and yet it got broadcast as if it was news without any explanation of its propaganda purpose.
I agree with you, Bob. Everybody has the right of free speech, and we live in a free and open society. But I also have a right to, for my opinion. It's my humble opinion. And I expect that an interviewer with such a following would recognize that allowing Putin to use him as a mouthpiece serves no strategic interest of the US. And people on that level should know better than to serve as a propaganda tool for others.
I see we have a lot to talk about in our ensuing interviews, and I think that should be of interest to the American audience. But changing slightly, it was somewhat shocking to hear you say that what Russia has been doing was obvious to the Poles, that is, that Russia was the aggressor in World War II, but it wasn't obvious to us. Why don't we know about it like the Poles do?
As in any complicated issue, there are a lot of reasons. I just wanted to focus on one. That's what I've been doing in the former and this interview. We called it Russian threat. So we don't know about it because Russians have intentionally suppressed the formerly powerful voice of Poland. Remember the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, the largest country in Europe? It was the only country that occupied Moscow successfully in 1610. How many people know about that? Then it repelled the Ottoman Empire in 1683 at the gates of Vienna and practically defended Europe from the Muslim onslaught. How many remember that? And then in the 18th century, thereafter, Russia used the hybrid warfare of that day to weaken Poland internally and externally, leading to its ultimate unfortunate partition in 1795. Practically, the 19th century, Poland was erased from the map until 1919. But notwithstanding Poland's weakened state, within a year after Poland regained independence in 1919, Russians attacked again full force, and Poland defeated Russia in 1920. And it's called the miracle on the Vistula. It is a miracle if you decided that Poland had been dead for over 100 years. And then from 1939 until the Solidarity movement in 1989, Russia occupied and controlled Poland as its colony. And of course, we don't like this word colony, but that's what it was. Only in the last 3 decades has Poland's voice been free and relatively freely expressed. But understand it takes time and support for a repressed nation to regain international stature, so that its voice rises above its historic suppression. I think that I and some other Polish writers are literally screaming to the world that the time to hear the Polish voice is now. Because of the Russian war in Ukraine and its consequences, we're running out of time to renew the Polish-American cooperation and save Europe, actually. Europe has a potential to defend itself on paper We talk a lot about it. We cite numbers, dollar amounts, but in reality, it is practically disarmed and infiltrated with scores of politicians financed by Russian dirty money. So Poland is not waiting; it is buying needed weapons and strengthening its army as fast as they can. And it makes sense for us to help them in their effort so it can lead other European countries on the way to stand up to the Russians. If we're going to be waiting for Germans or French, then, good luck. We've already been waiting long enough.
Well, that's a mouthful that you've just put out. I guess I can see in the interview, I noticed Putin was asked whether or not he had any intentions to invade Poland, and his answer was, well, not unless they invade us first. I guess given his answer about World War II and the fact that he has mentioned Poland repeatedly in his interview, and the fact that Poland has in fact shown great strength even in its suppressed state, that is to oppose Russia. Sounds to me like Russia has a considerable fear of Poland. And given that context, though, it takes me back to the first question. Why do you think we're already involved in World War III and that the Poles recognize it, but not us?
Well, I think that there's a lot of smart people in Washington who know exactly what's going on. Sometimes some of them, just wait for the signal to open their mouth. But the obvious thing is that kinetic war, where you start shooting one another, requires preparation. The bigger the war, the more the preparation you need, and it needs careful planning before you start shooting. And the careful aggressor, which Russians are, uses this information to confuse, divide, and disorganize the enemy. So, for example, Putin's recent reassertion of a long-standing claim that Poland started World War II is a clear attack from the arsenal of hybrid war techniques. The effects of this is confusion, misinformation, disinformation, and they're carefully choreographed and studied by Russian special ops. And it's all done within the legal boundaries, behind the scenes, with the victim hardly realizing the threat level. And Poles know this and see it clearly. Still, the Americans are skeptical and unconvinced that they're being manipulated by the Russians as well. Well, guess what? We are here in the United States. We better wake up.
That poses the question: how long have Russians been attacking the United States this way?
And again, it's not my words. If you look around, you'll find out that according to some Russian KGB analysts who defected to the United States and the West, Russia has been engaged in undermining American confidence in its institutions, educational system, legal system, and cultural values since the end of World War II.
Well, how long have they been working to prepare for the current assault in Ukraine?
I believe that they started the moment they lost Ukraine. That's 1991. But I think that in Ukraine, Russia has been engaged in a prolonged testing phase since well before 2014. One of the techniques was that ethnic Russians were encouraged to immigrate to the Donbas area of Ukraine. Then a plebiscite was arranged to create independent republics within Ukraine who ostensibly wanted to reunite with Mother Russia. And this action, I think it was, people say, was in preparation before the initial incursion by Little Green Men and started the kinetic component. And then Russia invaded Ukraine big time in 2022. And this kinetic component created, remember, a tension between the United States and NATO members on the topic of who should supply weapons and technical support to Ukraine and when, which served as a diversion, creating suspicion and chaos. among the allies, even before the Russian military invasion of Ukraine in 2022. And we have politicians today in the United States who say, you know what, enough is enough. We don't need NATO. We're doing great. Well, I don't think we're doing that great.
Neither do I. So you're saying, but you're saying that Ukraine is the kinetic front that materialized out of a longer period of planning and preparation. And I'm assuming that that means also disinformation here in this country to create that kind of confusion among our politicians. But was this also true in Syria or Iraq? I mean, are the Russians behind all of this?
Bob, you're right. I mean, the Russian military footprints are obvious in Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, Libya, Niger, and now they're materializing in Mali. And each assault was preceded by hybrid warfare tactics. Disinformation that exploits, widens, and deepens political cracks and fissures in a nation. Cyber attacks and propaganda inciting division and fear. Russians have been practicing these skills way before Catherine the Great started manipulating the election of King Stan to the Polish throne in 1764, as I'm describing in my book, Kaz. And they're really masters at this game. So underappreciating them is a big mistake. And you know what? I'm just going to throw in one more Russian plot to consider. Spain. Spain is one of the countries that opposes the European Union's direct help to Ukraine because Russia is so far away from their beaches. What do they care? But do you remember the Spanish March 1939 Civil War? It was the warm-up before World War II that started in September. 500,000 dead. Now, recently, Spanish courts confirmed and revealed that in 2017, Russians offered 500 billion with a B dollars and a small army of about 10,000 troops, an assault force to help the Catalan rebels secede from Spain. They talked about at least 100 casualties for starters to incite violence. And this Catalan sleeper cell was first formed during Michael Gorbachev's perestroika times. Remember the time of Russian handshakes, smiles, and promises. And one of the reasons for this generous offering now was creating a money laundering haven where cryptocurrency would be the king and Russians would, of course, run it.
I'm going to interrupt your flow here for just a second, but you just highlighted a topic that we need to pursue in more detail, I think, maybe at another interview, but it strikes me that the Spanish court did something that was unique in order to reveal this plot. And basically, it's my understanding that they followed the money. I mean, do you agree that we're not quick enough to do that? It certainly takes a lot of time and effort, a lot of investigation, but if we were to engage in that kind of a practice, might we find surprising traces of Russian money in Brexit and other elections?
So, of course, Bob, you're right on the money. I think we all know if you want to know the truth of certain things, follow money trail.
Well, we should definitely pursue that in another interview. But let's go back to your discussion about Russia lurking behind so many of the current wars around the world.
Russians were preparing for the current kinetic phase in Ukraine already in 1994 seriously, when they convinced us and Great Britain to sign the Budapest Memorandum. Remember, giving Ukraine security assurances for their then existing borders in return for their nuclear stockpiles.
That's another strategic blunder. We have to follow up.
Russians.
I'm sorry, I interrupted. I didn't hear what you said.
Yeah, I just said that we, like little babies, not only encouraged the Ukrainians to give up the stockpiles, but we gave it to the Russians.
Yeah. Yeah, that we definitely need to follow that up also. That's a very strategic blunder.
So, to
But
continue, it's basically they used us to weaken Ukrainian defensive capabilities then.
yes.
And whether we like it or not, we have been on a collision course with them, with the Russians in Ukraine since 1991, when
Hmm.
they fell apart. So Russians first sent sleeper cells, citizens, to relocate in Ukraine, send their little green men to create chaos, and then annex Donbass and Crimea. They had lists of the military who agreed to take a retirement rather than fight for Ukrainians. And now we're in a hot phase, but because of our internal political competition, the presidential campaign, I think, is at the forefront. We treat Ukraine more as a tool in our domestic political confrontation than a signal to unite and eliminate the Russian threat before it's too late.
So one of the assertions you seem to be making in discussing the Ukraine situation is that since the Cold War, the Russians are trying to destroy us from within. They're trying to weaken our resolve and our sense of national identity and purpose. If we do that enough, we don't have to go to war, right?
Exactly, Bob. Since the Cold War, Russians seek to destroy us from within. And notice how we have been torn apart by allegations of Russian meddling in our elections. Our internal divides have been exploited to create near civil war conditions. They have been using their bottomless stacks of petrodollars to influence and corrupt politicians from Germany and France to Great Britain, Italy, and Austria, and here in the US as well. We like wealthy capitalists, don't we? So Russians gay has sent us thousands of rich oligarchs, and they're all working very hard. Of course, they're not working on economy.
So you're suggesting, I guess, that Russians are exploiting our kind of historic divide between isolationism and international engagement?
These are just big, broad terms. And of course, among many more points of weakness or potential division, this is one. And some of us complain that Ukraine is too far. It's Europe's problem. We don't have the resources. We don't want to be directly involved. We don't want to send necessary weapons or aircraft because it might provoke Russians. And so the Russians are winning at the start. We're showing them that we are afraid of them. From politicians, it's a silly argument. But look, they have declared that they're not stopping there. I wouldn't be surprised that we might wake up one day soon with our 401ks wiped out, or no spare parts to build the cars we need and enjoy so much. So isolationism didn't work during World War II. I think is even more unrealistic today. But still, advocates for isolationism are finding funds to re-engage that trope.
Well, I'm beginning to understand your message. We need to be much more attentive to the influences on us and more forward thinking in our planning as citizens of the world. And I think in particular, we need to take the benefit of the wisdom of the Polish people who seem to have the greatest experience in dealing with this Russian threat.
I believe that Americans have plenty of wisdom. We just need focus and priorities. So when you evaluate different things, especially as you have the whole world in view, we need to make our decisions. We cannot sit on the sidelines like we're fans of a football game. We must awaken to the fact that we're right in the middle of a new form of war, the start of World War III, in which shrapnel is already hitting our economy, self-confidence, and national unity of purpose. This is why we Americans must wake up, mobilize, get strong, and provide and prove that we're reliable allies, not only during times of peace, squabble, and intrigues, but in times of serious war. We must unite like it is expected from our name, the United States. We must place Poland on a short list of candidates for more robust cooperation and seriously consider what they have to offer and how to use it wisely. Like it or not, Poland was the canary in the mine in World War II and is in the same position as World War III ramps up.
Well, thank you, Bogdan. I think you've provided us with an illuminating view of the Russian threat and the Polish perspective on recognizing this way ahead of us. But I suggest that we've been on this for a while. Let's wrap this up and continue it in additional interviews. So viewers, thank you again for your participation, and I will ask Bogdan some follow-up questions to better understand why the United States should switch gears and consider building Polish strength in Europe more earnestly. And thank you very much for attending, and thank you, Dr. Kotnis, for giving us this illuminating information about our most recent history since World War II.
Bob, thank you. Thank you for motivating me to open my mouth. Thank you to all the viewers. And I promise I'm going to try to answer all Bob's questions honestly and directly. So see you soon, hopefully. Goodbye.